So you might guess, based on my dress and based on the theme, who I am. So Gandalf, the wizard. So forgive me for a lot of license here in this talk. And there's a very cool, almost a tree beard face here. Yes? Is that gray or white? Gray. Yes, I have the gray shirt and the gray vest on. Okay. So I took a lot of liberties here and probably some copyright infringement. So I'm not rich, so suing me is useless. There and back again, our journey to Scarthgap and beyond 2028. There and Back Again is the second title to The Hobbit, for those of you who do not know. So my name is Tim Orling. I work for Consulco Group. We are a services company. We do all kinds of embedded Linux stuff. If you use U-Boot at all, you can thank us because Tom Reaney is still maintaining, still keeping that merging and going. We do all kinds of hardware and software build, testing, and design. We actually just reintegrated another hardware design group, so we have even more hardware capability now. We're based in San Jose, California, but we're actually global. So we've got folks in Bulgaria, Portugal, Sweden, many, many other places, Canada, United States, Mexico. And so we have quite a presence worldwide. So a little bit about me. I've got at least a decade in Yocto Project and Open Embedded. I've got at least 2 decades, probably closer to 3 in embedded in general, even before Linux, microcontroller stuff. I maintain about 3 dozen recipes in OE core. I don't tend to do all the day-to-day upgrades because other folks beat me to it most of the time. So I just do the ones that break and fix them when there's problems. I'm the original MetaPython co-founder. And for those of you who ever worry about whether or not you're good enough, my first patch for MetaPython couldn't even parse because I hand edited it right before I sent the email. So patch test, might have caught that. I don't know. I'm also a MetaPerl maintainer. I'm part of the original Crops team. That was actually why I was originally hired to work on the Yocto project officially by Intel. And I'm doing my best to maintain that. Most of the maintenance there is actually done by automated helpers. GitHub CI, thank you. GitHub Actions. I am now have taken on MetaJava as a maintainer because nobody was going to do it, and it's just bit rotting, and so I'm trying to do things there. I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'm an Open Embedded board member and an Open Embedded TSC member. So, friends, let us start on a journey together. So our LTS journey began back with the announcement on the 20th of March in 2020 that Dunfell was going to be an LTS release with 2 years of support. A bit later, it was announced that it was 4 years of support. And I think as we say goodbye to this friend this month, I think it's kind of fun to think of it as like those were the Shire days, right? Things were kind of quaint. We could all just sit around and have pints of ale, and we didn't even know what we were getting into, right? So since then, we've had many, many passes to cross over. I'll note the highlights are Honister is the great divide. That is where the override syntax changed forever. So if you are on anything before Honister, you are going to have some fun with the override syntax. The good news is there are some scripts in scripts contrib that will do all these conversions of the override syntax, the variable changes for inclusive naming, and a bunch of other things like that. So go use those scripts, look at them, look at the source of them, modify them to make them do better things for your own layers. So then we had Kirkston, which is the current LTS release with support until 2026. We learned a lot doing Dunfell, and we also learned that we needed 4-year support. So Kirkston started basically, almost right out of the bat, knowing we were going to have 4-year support. It wasn't quite at the release, but it was shortly thereafter. So what happened with all these LTSs? Well, Dunfell was where we saw a huge number of vendors finally move to one release instead of scattered across 12 releases. It made everybody's life easier. Kirkston really, really made that possible. But what we saw is that people are reluctant to change still. And so the LTS basically allowed folks to stay on Dunfell and stay on Dunfell and stay on Dunfell and stay on Dunfell and stay on Dunfell. So a lot of what we do at Consulco has been uplifting people from ancient releases to, say, Dunfell. We try to get them to go to Kirkston, right? And I've already got customers that I'm trying to get to move to Scarthgap. So as we moved along, I wanted to note Mickeldor means great door or giant door. And I wanted to do a slide for this, but I couldn't really figure out a good reason to bring it in other than just to say, speak friend and enter. So it's another Lord of the Rings reference for anybody that's a geek like me. So Nan build was the next release. That's the current stable, but is just about done. Scarthgap will be released this month. This will be another 4-year LTS release. I think probably the majority of the changes, the real meat of what was going on here happened in Mickeldor, but we had a lot of things like SPDX releases SPDX license handling and SBOM stuff and quite a few other improvements. Scarthgap is where we saw the Sovereign Tech Fund work. And so there's a lot of improvements that were really bit rotting and needed some help and moved along. And next we have Styhead to look forward to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Consulco specific contributions to Scarthgap. The first thing that I spent was probably only 8 weeks of actual hours, but it was about 8 months of actual duration. This was funded by the Yocto Project members themselves. This was not part of the Sovereign Tech Fund work. But I'm one of the last people around that actually knows how to do anything with Django and web stuff in the Python community. And so we had a few things that were needed. I'm just going to try to highlight the big ones. So one of the problems when Layer Index was originally written, basically everybody followed the stable release names. So you always had a branch. Usually your development branch was master. We didn't have inclusive naming collisions with that term back then. And usually everybody had their particular stable branch available. Over time, what we've seen is that people now have, default branches, main or dev or something like that. And we have vendors that have branches which are based on their own product numbers, right? It has nothing to do with Yocto Project releases. So as a Yocto Project user, if you go look at, I'm going to pick on them just a little bit nicely, but if you go look at MetaQT6, you'll have no idea which branch you should pick. 0. When you look at their website, you have no idea what you should be using until you start clicking on branches and realizing that they're supporting 5 or 6 layer series compat in each branch. We did make some improvements to that in the actual layer index data. But so there had been a implementation a long time ago called actual branch. It was this variable that would allow you to use something different. But there was no visibility of that to anybody outside of the maintainers or anybody looking at the code. And so now I added this actual branch field to the submit layer form. This really only helps right now if you are on a branch like, for instance, if your current master, right, what should be seen as the landing page is actually Kirkston, then you might want to put that there. It's more important though if it's dev or main or something like that, that's what you need to use. I also added the ability to force create what's called a layer branch in the layer index. So this is it's a database structure, right? So there's a layer item, which is the actual layer itself. So that's, MetaPython, right? And then there's a branch like Scarthgap. So those two together is the MetaPython Scarthgap branch, layer branch, right? So this is the actual object that you're seeing when you go to the layer index and view a branch. Unfortunately, that still requires a layer index main admin. There's one that I know of that does all of this every single day. So if you're wondering who's doing it all, it's me. So if you wonder why I vent on LinkedIn, it might be me. So this still requires this manual intervention. But the cool thing is I can run a script like this in a container on the actual server, and I can force create your meta non-conforming layer into something that we can use. So another thing that was there, it's embarrassing how little code change there was to make this work, but there's branch comparison. This is super, super cool, okay? It only works on OE core right now, as far as I can tell, but you can go in and say from Scarthgap, from NANBuild to Scarthgap, and it will show you in green everything that was new, all the new recipes and classes and everything that were added, and it will show you everything that changed, what the version changes were, and it will show you everything that was dropped. I have a customer right now that I'm working with that's on Sumo. And I just ran this Sumo to Scarthgap comparison, and guess what? It works. That doesn't mean I'm done, but it shows me what, it allowed me to give them a hint as to what they're looking forward to, right? I'm not sure exactly why it's only really working on Open Embedded Core yet, but we'll talk more about that a little bit. So the other thing, I don't think people realize before Auto Upgrade Helper, there was a thing called the recipe reporting system. And a lot of maintainers used to use this back in the day, right? And what was really cool is that it would run, daily or hourly or whatever scripts, and would look and see if there was a recipe that needed to be upgraded, right? We're all used to Auto Upgrade Helper these days, right? And this is super piece of cake now, but we didn't have that back then. And so it still works. I had to make some changes to get it to work, but you can now see, at least for OE core, what the status is of a given recipe and whether or not it needs to be updated and things like that. There's still a few glitches here. I think the statistics are a little bit off. It doesn't seem to handle really well if a recipe gets deleted. And I have added some other layers to the to be looked at for this, but they don't really quite seem to work as well as I would like. So in total, there were 40 commits that I did during the time from 11/6/2023, which is when we officially started the Scarthgap efforts. And here's a kind of a fun little thing. If you want to, get your own numbers, you can use this little Git command line to find your own stuff. So again, this work was funded by the Yocto Project membership themselves, and I'm eternally grateful to them for letting me spend work time on something that was really bugging me, and I really wanted it to be better. One thing I forgot to put a slide in for, but as we're moving forward with the new BitBake setup tool and things like that, everybody's familiar with BitBake Layers add layer, right? But go and try BitBake Layers layer index fetch, okay? Because layer index fetch, unlike add layers, knows about the metadata and knows about the dependencies. So if you go and try to add meta networking, if you do BitBake Layers add layer meta networking, it will blow up on you because it doesn't already have meta OE and MetaPython present. If you do that same thing with BitBake Layers layer index fetch, it knows about all those dependencies and it will figure it out for you and add them all to your BB layers and everything like that. Okay, so we did quite a bit of maintenance in OE core. So in OE Core, there's 108 recipes that Consulco personnel maintain. So it's quite a few. I personally have about 3 dozen. We had about 53 commits to this cycle, just during Scarthgap itself. And we've got a couple of mix-in layers. This is something the TSCs and the board and so on, we'd all like to see people utilizing these things more. Personally, I was finding that I needed or wanted U-Boot support for the Raspberry Pi 5 because I was trying to introduce OTA over-the-air updates. And we needed U-Boot to be working in order for that to happen. Well, it turns out that very conveniently, U-Boot releases the same month that the LTS releases, and we aren't going to put a new version of U-Boot into OE Core the day that the release is going to happen. So the workaround is you go and you create a Scarthgap U-Boot Meta LTS mix-ins layer. So this has all of the U-Boot support that you need, but it's in a different layer. And so it overrides the layer that, it overrides OE Core and gives you newer versions. It also turns out that some of the newer Rockchip SoCs need this support. So I think this pattern is going to be ongoing. We're going to see more and more stuff that's going to be coming during the next 4 years while Scarthgap is being supported. And if we don't keep updating U-Boot, people are not going to have that support. So I'm committed to actually keeping U-Boot up to date for the rest of Scarthgap. So as new RC candidates come out, if there are features there that are relevant and to something that you care about, let me know so that I actually have a reason to add the RC, because otherwise I'll just do the releases, right? But I already know that we need 2024-07 for some Rockchip support. If people really, really want it, I will do a U-Boot for Kirkston, but I don't currently need it. So if people really want it, let me know. Scott Murray currently maintains is part of the people that maintain the Kirkston Rust layer. We absolutely will be doing a Scarthgap Rust layer. The problem with Rust language is that it moves fast and keeps upgrading to newer versions, and you need those newer versions to stay up to date. We can't stick on what was in core. So there was a lot of Python improvements. This is beyond just my work and our work. This is going into work of the community. I think a huge part of what I did for Kirkston was immense hours of work, and Richard Purdy put in a lot of work as well, was to get the PEP 517 build backends to work for Python. So this is this huge, huge tectonic shift from setup.py to PyProject TOML. Okay. Thankfully, Ross Burton came back after the fact and cleaned things up even better. So what we actually have today is a combination of a whole lot of people's blood, sweat, and tears. And I do mean blood. So the current classes that are there are all inheriting from this Python PEP 517 class. Most of the actual real work, the do install and do configure and all that stuff is actually in that class. Actually not do configure. There's not much configuration, but the do install and do compile is almost entirely in PEP 517. So the other ones, FlitCore, Meson Pi, Hatchling, Maturin, Poetry Core, and the new version of the old tool, Setup Tools, is Setup Tools Build Meta. Those are all specific implementations for those backends. So if you look at a PyProject TOML, if it has a section in it that says build and a variable that says build backend, then you know that this is what you should be looking into. If you come across a new flavor that is not in OE Core yet, please draw it to my attention and let me know about the recipes and things that are out there, right? We want these in as soon as we can get them because the Python community is moving very, very rapidly. The thing that I really want to highlight here, though, is the benefit of Sovereign Tech Fund and the benefit of a community. Because I had stared at Recipe Tool and DevTool for 4 years trying to figure out how the heck I'm going to implement the Pi Project TOML stuff. And it was driving me batty because I'm just staring at this old code and I couldn't break away from it. I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And along comes Julian Stefan, and he just ripped a bunch of code and threw it away. And we don't need it. And it's fine that it's gone, right? And he made it so I could add 2 new classes, which I'll talk about in just a second. And as Trevor talked about earlier, you can now just use a PyPy. US folks say it a little differently than Canadians. Got to make fun of each other's accents. And so now you can do much, much better recipes with DevTool add. And I'll talk more about plans in the future. So the classes that I added, Maturin is a big one. This had been on my radar since Kirkston, but we didn't really need it yet. This is the modern Python plus Rust build tool. Okay, so if you are using Rust, if you're writing code in Rust because you want safety and performance, but you still want the simplicity or the interaction of Python, then this is the tool for you, right? And so the two actually go both directions. You can call Rust code from Python, and you can call Python code from Rust with Maturin. So there's a PEP 517 backend and the Maturin recipe itself. Because of the work that Julian had done, it took me about an hour to add recipe tool and DevTool support and OE self-tests, right? I mean, it was bonehead simple to add that stuff. So now all of a sudden, I'm not just bringing this class in, I'm bringing in a class that's tested, and the auto builder is going to tell us whether it's still working. Because guess what? Stuff bit rots. The other one was Mason Pi. Now, Mason Pi was created by somebody else. I forget who exactly, but thank you for the person that did it, to MetaPython. And we weren't ready for it yet in OE Core. We decided to let it live in MetaPython for a little while, right? But then it turned out, guess what? NumPy moved to that, or NumPy moved to that. And so now we needed this new thing. So as I always do, when I see that it needs to be in core, but it's going to be used everywhere, move it to core, right? This is what we do. But again, I could add DevTool support and OE self-test. Super, super easy. So another thing that happened during all the Scarthgap stuff is a lot of improvements to MetaOpen Embedded. So Consulco folks did 130 commits into MetaOpen Embedded. So just to give you an idea, OE Core had about 1,890 commits this cycle, and MetaOpen Embedded had about 1,800 commits this cycle. So that gives you kind of a feeling for how many were involved. A while back, I had added this, Richard Purdy had added this kind of per recipe p-test image to OE Core, and I had added it to MetaOpen Embedded, MetaOE, MetaPython, MetaPerl. And the cool thing here is it's using BB class extend and MC extend stuff in the background to dynamically see that your recipe can build into an image. And so you just simply type, in our case, MetaPython p-test image, whatever it is, Python 3, PyLint or something, right? And then run the test image task on it, and it goes and it builds that image in isolation, right? It's only your recipe with its dependencies and everything else, and then it goes and runs the p-test for you, right? So these are the 6 layers now that have that. So Kim came back in and did a lot of cleanup and added some other layers that I had not added, multimedia, networking, and file systems. A lot of community members have really, really been helping this cycle. Really want to thank Derek Straka and Alper Ock for actually adding a whole bunch of new p-tests and bringing some p-tests back. And Kim already knows he's got my undying thanks for, never-ending thanks for his efforts. So, trying to keep along with my little theme here. We've got the fellowship of the ecosystem, right? The fellowship of the ring. So, along the way, we used to all work at one company or a few companies, right? Most of the Yocto Project core folks were all Intel employees at one point. And things have changed. We've all moved different places and so on. Some of us are at other platinum partners and so on. But One of the things that I noticed in this cycle in particular is there's a whole bunch of consultancies, and you would think we'd be competing with each other. We are not at all. We are collaborating like crazy. We are trying to find which of these consultancies is the best fit for somebody looking for a job and recommending them wholeheartedly to get them in there. I've done this with at least 2 people that I know of in particular. So anyway, so the Sovereign Tech Fund, really cool opportunity, right? This is what we need more of, is we finally have this outside pool of money, right? There's this big old pot of money that could be used to pay us to do open source work and not just product work, okay? So a bunch of these consultancies, so Bootlin was brought in before all of this. They're basically the ones doing SWAT and maintaining the auto builder stuff and keeping things going and helping Richard get the patches in, right? They took over for a team that we used to have at, a prior employer of mine. We've got a lot of work by Smile and Baylib and Savoir-Faire Linux and so on, that have really made this this release change and be a big difference. So I personally really cared a lot about patch test. The history there is that, Patchworks was a fork of a fork, and patch test only worked with a fork of a fork. So that the polling function that we relied on only worked in the fork of a fork. It was something that we, Yocto Project, added to our own fork, right? Don't fork it, contribute it back, right? Lesson learned. No homegrown tools unless we really need them. And so I think that, these consultancies now, we're actually like the fellowship of the ecosystem, right? Our bread and butter is supporting all these customers out there that need it, that are scrambling to figure it out. And all these poor engineers, they're just getting pushed to their limits and never have any time to actually figure anything out and clean things up. And they keep pushing out stuff that they don't really like. And they keep staying on releases they don't really want to be on and things like that, right? And the consultancies jump in to fix that. So I think this is like becoming a key pattern now in the ecosystem. Maybe it's always been there, but to me, being that I'm part of that now, it's changed. So Consulco Group directly is involved in a bunch of different communities. So Scott Murray works pretty tirelessly on AGL. I attend all the Metategra meetings that I can, and I'm trying my best to upgrade and bring in new things, adding vendor support for new boards and things like that. These are all on my list. So I'll highlight for Metategra in this release is we've got the new Jetpack 5, so a newer version from NVIDIA of all the tooling, and the newer Linux kernel that gets, I think, a 5.15 Linux kernel. And then Jetpack 6 is the newest one, which is only for the Orin Plus devices. But this one actually lets you build your own kernel, bring your own kernel for the first time ever. So it's pretty interesting. So there's a lot of work going on by Matt Madison and a whole bunch of other folks in Metategra. And I've given a couple of talks on that. Meta Robot Operating System. I try not to call it Meta ROS because of Ross Burton makes his ears tweak. So Meta Robot Operating System. There's a working group in the community now, and it meets at least once a month. I think it's every 2 weeks. We're improving the CI system quite a bit. So in the old days, LGE was doing all this. Martin Jansa and Herb Kuda were doing all the work behind the scenes, and it was a massive amount of effort. I think they had 12 servers or something like that doing the equivalent of the auto builder type of stuff, right? Building things. So we're now upgrading to newer robot operating system releases and newer Yocto Project releases. And also a shout out to Leon Anavi, who is the maintainer for MetaRouc, the MetaRouc community layer and MetaRouc Raspberry Pi. Smile doesn't have anybody here at this conference, so I just wanted to share some stage time with them. They did a whole bunch of contributions that really matter to me personally, right? And this is all through Sovereign Tech Fund, but the goal here was to try to make Meta Open Embedded, realizing like Meta Open Embedded is not just something that's off there and it's catch all. It used to be the catch-all for whatever was taken out of open embedded core, right? And it was just moved there. And it used to be set it and forget it, right? But that's not okay anymore because we all depend on these recipes and these layers. And so luckily we had this opportunity where Smile could go in and add CVE checks and patch status and do upgrade status checking, right, to see if recipes needed to be upgraded. So we have the ability to run the auto upgrade helper on Meta Open Embedded. We're choosing not to run it right now because it's a lot of volume. There's about 400 or 500 recipes in a given time that need to be redone. They're mirroring the sources for all the LTS releases and some of the stable releases, which helps because some of you may have come across certain things that won't download anymore for whatever reason. We've also got reproducibility status running on the recipes. And one of the cool things that they also were able to do is to help with improving p-tests is you can actually put on Warn QA and see that your recipe has p-testing capability available, but you didn't add it yet, right? So if you go and look at anything on PyPy, right, it's got a tests folder. It's really obvious. It has tests. Why aren't we running it? So my future plans, layer index needs a phase 2. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's really only got tests for the update script right now, and we'd like to add Selenium GUI tests, a lot like what the folks at SLFair did for Toaster. We need to do a little bit more to allow layer maintainers to change their own active branch and see the status of their branches, because otherwise it's down to the admin having to run it. I'd like to see the branch comparison and recipe reporting systems working a little bit better and on other branches or other layers. I'd like to improve. We did a lot of improvements to the setting up your own instance, but I'd like to do some more improvements to that. And there's quite a few more Bugzilla entries to still be gone through. So that's looking for another source of funding to do that. We are actively moving our customers to Scarthgap right now already, like before it's even released, right? We're telling all of them, hey, Scarthgap's around the corner. Can we move you there now? So as I bring up a new customer, a new project, I basically ask them, what is your runway? You know, if it's a 6-month runway, then I'm putting you on Scarthgap. I'm not going to put you on Kirkston, right? Unless you really, really have some future risk of aversion. We're going to continue to support Kirkston throughout its lifetime. I'd like to see some more stuff with Python in terms of dev tool and recipe tool, dependency hinting. So it knows kind of what's there, but it doesn't really realize that the recipes exist and it doesn't add it immediately. And I'd like it to be a little bit smarter about p-test and upstream testing. MetaJava needs a lot of love, but one of the things that's really hurting right now is all we've got is OpenJDK 7 and OpenJDK 8. Those are very, very old. 7's basically dead. 8's pretty old. It's still supported, but so we need. Java is one of those things where if you're going to build OpenJDK, you have to bootstrap from an n-1. So to build, you start with ECJ, and then you build something, and then you build ICE-T, and then you build OpenJDK 7, and then you build OpenJDK 8, and then you can build OpenJDK 9. And the current version right now is 22, so do the math. No, I'm not doing that. Okay, so the fix is like what we do with Golang, right? We're going to do a binary native. I already started the work on this. But this was my own time, folks. And so, you know, we need some support. We need some funding to make that happen. So that's something where we can go and definitely make an improvement. There's a lot of other things we could do there, clean up some stuff. Working with the MetaROS folks to add dev containers, which work with Visual Code stuff, to make the crops containers even more useful in that kind of environment. I personally really like using submodules a lot. And I love COS. I don't really like repo tool much, but I love COS. And I'm excited about what the BitBake layers, setup layers tool is going to do, but I'd like to see submodule support in there, including that layer index fetch that I talked about earlier for BitBake layers. And I'd like to see patch tests extending into other layers. We do have some challenges ahead, though, folks. And I'm not going to pull any punches here. I'm getting old enough that I don't care. So if you like it, great. If you disagree with me, great. So this is alluding to Richard's letter, but also to my own venting on LinkedIn. The maintainer's dilemma. So I have spent the last 4 years of my life learning how to stop being a workaholic and stop killing myself with my job, okay? So I work like under 50 hours a week, usually under 45 hours a week, right? And the rest of the time, I'm not working on Open Embedded anymore. I'm not working on tools and fun and things, right? I'm doing other things in my life, right? Okay, so it's a lot like wearing the one ring, right? You become invisible. A lot of the work you're doing is unseen. I think most folks will realize that they're seeing emails from Kim at 3 a.m. and at midnight. So when did he sleep, right? And Richard Purdy, the same thing, right? We are passionate about what we're doing, so we're constantly drawn by the eye of Sauron, right? The eye of these open source projects, to be drawn into them and keep looking at them and keep working on them and fidgeting on this thing that's broken. And I know how to fix it. I can do this. I know how to do it. My precious, I can fix my precious, right? At the risk of losing our health, including mental health and our humanity, right? And just like Smeagol, we end up becoming no longer what we were. And it's really just a thankless job. So we have a lot of people to thank over the years that have come in and been MetaPython maintainers, Meta Open Embedded overall maintainers, and so on, that have come and gone, right? Because they burned out. This is real problem, folks. So in the long run, you're only going to get from open source what you put into it, what you support in it, right? So if you're not going to have your engineers actively, if you are a large company and you're using open source projects and you do not actually have your engineers directly contributing to all of those projects that you're using, you're just consuming. You're sucking at the tit of the open source community and you're burning us all out, and folks are going to just stop doing it, right? So I've had folks say, yeah, but CEOs don't see it that way because you're still doing the work. I'm giving you a heads up. There's some folks in this room that are doing a lot of work that are on the verge of being done with it, right? We come and we go out of that depth of despair, right? But it's real. So another thing I want to say to everybody, no matter what your product is, I don't care if it's a medical device, I don't care if it's a rocket ship, I don't care if it's an airplane, I don't care if it's a train, I don't care how long your commitment is to support. Beware of rigidity, because you've got Warm Tongue whispering in your ear, don't change, stay the same, keep the old release. Sumo was just fine. Daisy was awesome, right? So just whispering in your ear, like, don't worry about the new Linux kernel, don't worry about anything, right? No, because the reality is you can't backport everything. It's impossible. You just can't. And so there's going to be vulnerabilities and so on. And meanwhile, your team members want some new tool. They want a new version of Node, but they want to be on Sumo, but they want a new version of Node. Well, the way we got you the new version of Node was giving you Scarthgap, right? So don't stay forever static. So upgrade constantly, right? Figure out a way, because the hordes of Mordor are just there waiting to find a vulnerability and break in and steal from you. So find some kind of processes within your company that allow your product to float on top of the operating system. I've given talks on this before. Trust me, I understand your industry. I will get you through the problems, right? There are ways around it. So when I was working on the SIL2 Linux MP project for Safety Critical Linux, we were talking to Tuv Sud, and we said, Tuv Sud, if we give you a multiprocessor Linux that has been, operating system that has been approved as safety critical, and then someone else comes with another product based on top of that, with a Delta, can they get a Delta certification? And guess what the answer was? Yes. Okay, so stop with the safety critical industry can't handle moving forward, right? You need to find the right partners and start changing these things, right? Medical industry and everything the same way. So we've got these old ways that are stuck in stone. We can't change fast enough, right? So change those processes, right? We can't just keep staying in things. So, in character, fly, you fools. I'm supposed to yell and fall backwards, but whoops. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. Reach out to us and reach out to me. I'll be here all week, and I'm happy to talk to you about anything that I talked about today or anything else you'd like to talk about. Anyway, thanks, and any questions?